Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening.
All right.
You have notes. You didn't tell me about bringing notes.
I had to have notes. You have a long career. And usually when I do the research, I can absorb the direction. But your life has so many tentacles that I had to write some of this stuff down, okay? Let's start with your life before politics, while you were figuring out what you were going to do even for college. Tell us about your upbringing.
I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My parents were divorced when I was 9, but we had a close-knit family, so I spent time with both parents and all of my grandparents. I was an only child. I grew up in the west side of Philadelphia. And in those days, children had a lot of freedom to move around the city, so when it was time to go to high school, I went to high school on the other side of town to an all-girls public high school. It was my father's choice. He thought it was the best school for me. He thought it was the best school for anybody, but especially for me. And so I went to an all-girls public high school with all-female teachers, all-female administrators. So at 13 years old, what was introduced into my life was the leadership of women, and in all sorts of backgrounds. So we were members of, my mother actually was a member her entire life of St. Thomas African Episcopal Church, which was founded by Absalom Jones. When Richard Allen and Absalom Jones left the Episcopal Church in Philadelphia in the 1700s, Absalom Jones founded St. Thomas, which still operates. And the pastor, the minister there, was a pretty fiery preacher. So the combination of neighborhood experiences, my parents, my dad was a criminal defense attorney. He had a much bigger history than that, but I'll start there. My mother was a teacher and then a school administrator in Philadelphia. And then at church, the combination of those three, the school, home, and the church, really gave me my grounding, especially as an only child. So people who meet me now say I'm kind of tough.
Yeah.
And feisty.
That's not all they say about you.
Well, that's one of the things they say to my face, at least.
Right.
And I remind them that, I grew up in a big city, a city of 2 or 3 million people. And I was traveling across the city at 13 years old every single day. I didn't have brothers or sisters or cousins as backup. So you either had to learn to take care of yourself or learn to run very fast.
Yeah.
So
and you don't seem to be the kind of person who runs.
No, I ran.
Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why be in a fight if you don't have to, right? But I had a pretty typical 1940s, 1950s childhood. I loved dolls. I wanted to be a ballerina.
Now, when did that change?
Well, it changed because my mother said I could do that, but I needed to go to college too.
Right.
And so at 17, she suggested that I could continue to dance, but that I needed to go to college. Okay. So I went to Howard University. But an interesting story, the other day I was in a grocery store in Atlanta, and I saw a woman from the back. And no, I actually didn't see her. She turned around and saw me. It was Judith Jamison. Judith was a student at the same ballet school. We studied dance for 14 years together. She obviously went on to be a great dancer.
Right.
But just to tell you, I mean, those bonds are made so early. Here we are, both well into our 70s, and we recognize each other from the back.
Wow.
And she's obviously a wonderful dancer. It was nice to see her. She was in town for a few days. And we talked about how happy our mothers would be, who'd spent all these hours carting us around in those early years. I don't know if that's anything you wanted to know.
Oh, we want to know all of it.
So,
all right, it's very organic here.
You know, I
Okay.
mean, when Emmett Till was killed, let me back up. In those days, I ate dinner on the weekends at least with my grandparents and my parents, or at least my mother and my grandparents. And there was a lot of talk in the house about politics. This is the 50s and 40s and 50s. And my grandfather and my father were what they would call Lincoln Republicans. My grandmother and my mother were what they'd call Stevenson Democrats at the time. So there was a lot of discussion. In those days, nobody asked my opinion. I was just to listen. And so my interest in politics really started around the dinner table, because there wasn't much on television in those days. So I became interested in politics, and then Emmett Till was killed. And when he was killed, I got really angry. I was both afraid and angry. I mean, it just seemed crazy. At the same time, the minister at church, Father Anderson, started talking about apartheid in South Africa. Now, remember, I'm 12, 13 years old, and I hadn't heard of this place. I mean, I was going to school every day, but they weren't teaching African history, even in my all-black neighborhood school. So I went to the library. I used to go to the library after school, and nobody here will remember this, but you had to order your books, like you order a sandwich or something, and it would come out on a carousel. And I had ordered my books, but there was this other book that kept going round and round and round, and it was called Let My People Go by Albert Luthuli, who was the first Nobel Peace Prize winner from South Africa. He was a chief, and he was he's a pre-Mandela, pre-Nkrumah, that he was trying to work for the freedom of South Africans. So instead of doing my homework that night at school, my mother was working, so I went to the library until it was time for her to get home. And I read the book. And she told the story later, that I was very angry that day.
12, 13 years old.
Yeah, 12, I'm not even 13, I don't think. I was very angry, and she couldn't figure out why I was so angry. And I finally told her that I was mad that no one told me about the enslavement of people in South Africa. And those early conversations and those early exposures made me very, very concerned about poverty, discrimination, race, Emmett Till's death and murder. And then I go off to Howard University, and I'll finish my story there. And my colleagues, my student colleagues, were some of the founders of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at Howard University. Kwame Nkrumah, I can't think of his name. We called him Stokely. Bakari Sellers' brother, father, Cleve Sellers. So I'm now surrounded by students who are doing something about the conditions of discrimination, Jim Crow, and segregation, lynching, all sorts of things. Now, the truth is, I didn't have the nerve to join them on their summer work in the South, but I committed then that once I finished college, that I was going to be involved more directly in the issues that affect people who had not been as fortunate as I have been, and that I wanted to make a difference in any small way. I wasn't thinking about running for office, in any small way that I could, and that's what brought me south. In 1969, I moved to Talladega College and taught at Talladega College at 22, 23 years old.
What was your first experience with leadership?
My first experience was watching other people lead. I've always been an observer. And some of that might come from being an only child. You got to observe in order to be safe. You got to pay attention to what's going on around you. So Father Anderson was a leader. The head of my Brownie troop was a leader. The women who led the school at the high school were leaders. My father was a leader, even though he had troubles in his life. He was associated with the NAACP. My mother was associated with several charitable organizations. And then we studied Black history 1 week out of the month, out of the year. So you learned about leaders that way. I don't think there was any one leader for me. I was always fascinated by Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, especially Harriet Tubman, who women were not talked about as leaders with the kind of strength and courage that she had in the 1950s.
Let's talk about the nuance that exists in the conversation of women in leadership, okay? We understand that leadership is connected to society. And so what made somebody a great leader 50 years ago may not automatically make them a great leader today in the current social structure. You being a trailblazer, the first woman to ever be elected as mayor in the city of Atlanta, and I'm sure you have a lot of other first superlatives. What difference have you seen in the marketplace of both politics and corporate that you faced as a woman in leadership that you don't think others may have faced, if you think that's a thing?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you ask it that way. I could recount differences, but I don't really spend any time on that. I was expected to dress a certain way, to speak a certain way.
Now, when you say that, you mean in comparison to a male who
men.
may not be asked to do the same?
Well, men that were not.
Were not
because
asked to
I
do the same.
worked for two men.
We were going to get to that, yes.
I worked for Andrew Young and Maynard Jackson when they were mayors, and I know they were not. Because I observed it and I was
Right.
close enough to know. But on the other hand, I didn't ever really dwell on that. I'm one of those people who doesn't sweat the small stuff. So the fact that people, even when I was mayor, when I was elected, people would come up to, well, not before I was elected, and worked for Andy as the chief administrative officer, people would come up to me and introduce me as Andy's secretary,
Wow.
even though I was an executive.
Did you correct them?
No, I just said, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Because that wasn't the main point. I mean, my self-confidence doesn't come from that. It comes from my own experiences.
You know, she just hit on something that reminded me of one of my first experiences with President Barack Obama. So years ago when he was still Senator Barack Obama, and nobody really knew him, a lot of people called him Barack Obama. And I've even heard him, while he was a senator, being referred to as Barack Obama. He never corrected anybody. He never stopped them and said, I'm Barack. And I think it came from that internal confidence that you were just talking about.
Well, it wasn't, I mean, it was not malicious statement.
Sure.
I mean, you and I know that I'm perfectly capable of standing up on an issue.
Right.
But this is not an issue. They're being complimentary. They're not trying to demean me. They just don't know. I mean, my own mother asked me when I was mayor, now tell me what the mayor really does. You know, she had a master's degree.
Right.
You know, she was an educated woman. She read the newspaper. She was informed. So if my own mother wasn't clear what the mayor does, why should I expect anybody else to know the difference between a chief administrative officer or an executive assistant or anything like that? I mean, that's really not the point. I mean, you could spend all day worrying about that. Today, people meet me and they're excited. Hello, Mayor Jackson. They call me Mayor Jackson.
What do you say to that?
I say thank you very much. That's a proud mayor's name. I don't correct them.
And you know it's not malicious.
It's not malicious, but even if it were, I mean, if I'm going to get angry about something, I'm going to get angry about world peace.
Yeah.
And war and poverty and discrimination and black men being killed. I mean, there's lots to get angry about. My name is not one of them.
I think that puts things in perspective. That's remarkable. That's a remarkable way to look at life. Yeah. Mayor Franklin, you pick your battles. You do pick your battles. And some of the battles you picked, I sit back as a commentator and I say, I wonder why she picked that battle. Okay? So let's talk about a few of those battles. You were on my program, and I had no idea you were going to say what you said. Let's bring up the CBS 46 clip. You were on my radio show, and you basically said you almost considered running for mayor again. Do you remember that? Or you were just talking?
No, I thought about it.
You thought about it? All right. So she came on my radio program, and some of you who are listening, you know about it, but it sent shockwaves through the community of people wanting to be mayor of Atlanta. All right, so let's play some of that. Lights.
Our Keith Whitney was right there. You caught up with her today, Keith. That's an astonishing declaration from her. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it was a little bit surprising. You know, Shirley Franklin was mayor during the Great Recession, which was a lot like being captain of the Titanic. It wasn't her fault, but she had some tough decisions to make. Like you said, she almost suited up to run for mayor this year, which would have totally changed this race. After a friendly embrace with Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was in town for a mayoral candidates forum last night, former Mayor Shirley Franklin took to the microphone herself on WAOK radio to talk about the mayor's race.
I'm concerned about Atlanta having an honest mayor, a hard-working mayor, and a forward-thinking mayor. Someone who can build consensus, stop the fighting.
Franklin had polite words for current Mayor Kasim Reed, who has now officially endorsed Keisha Lance Bottoms. Reed was once Franklin's campaign manager.
I've been called aggressive and feisty, so I appreciate that some people might call him aggressive and feisty. I don't like the public fighting that I have seen over the last few years.
In fact, Franklin says the tone of the race is overshadowing the issues.
Denigrating people and name calling and slanderous comments. I don't like that. I don't like that from anybody. And I think that's unnecessary.
Franklin told talk show host Rashad Richey that she too had considered a run for the office.
Well, I thought seriously about running, but I decided, you know, the city needs to have this turnover in leadership, and we have a broad array and variety of different kinds of skills in the people who are running.
Shirley Franklin had a reputation as a straight shooter during her time at City Hall. When asked if there's a culture of corruption there now, she said this.
I'm beginning to think there might be. 3 indictments, a 4th with a raid. 4 is getting to be pretty big.
And of course, Shirley Franklin is nothing if she's not candid. You know, that corruption scandal that she was talking about, a huge deal to her, especially with the fact that half the council is going to be gone. And that leaves a huge vacuum of leadership down at City Hall. You know, a lot of her supporters wished that maybe she should run and should have run and helped with that leadership.
Yeah, it's just so.
All right. So let me give you guys some context. Reverend Jesse Jackson was in my studio that day. I interviewed Reverend Jackson because he actually brought me to Rainbow Push for their mayoral's forum, the debate for that day. So he flew down, and I was the moderator for that evening for the mayoral debate. I had you on my show that day as well. When I get to the mayoral debate, which I think was at Clark Atlanta University, it was, yeah. I get to the mayoral debate, and almost every candidate secretly came to me asking, were you serious about potentially running for mayor? Because they were afraid. Number one, you would have shifted the money balance significantly, and obviously the popularity. Even when I said I would be talking to you tonight, people started hitting me up on social media saying, Mayor Shirley Franklin, the last good mayor. How serious were you, and why were you considering running for mayor again after serving 8 years?
Well, I love the job, so that's a good reason. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the opportunity that I had to help to shape public policy on an array of issues. And I like public service. I've always liked public policy. We go all the way back to what I described to you in my earlier my childhood. So that would have been the main reason. Ultimately, my body just couldn't handle it. I mean, I just felt that, I mean, some people say I can do it, you know, I'm still walking around. I know it's a little different.
How tough is that job?
I was physically exhausted.
Yeah.
Especially the first 3 or 4 years. And several people said to me when I was thinking about this, oh, you could hire someone to do this, that, or the other. I'm one of those people, I'm all in when I'm there.
Sure.
I mean, if there's a tough issue, I want to be in the middle of it.
Right.
There was an issue recently, and a gentleman called, someone I respect, called and said they wanted to brief me. I said, no, I don't really need to be briefed. And he said, why? I said, because in order for me to really be briefed well by you, I have to do some research myself, and I'm not that interested. I mean, it's going to take me hours to get up to speed to have a real conversation about a tough, complicated issue. So I'll just watch from the sidelines. I'm not one of those people typically who shoots from the hip.
Yeah.
I like to be grounded in research and information and maybe even just reflection.
You just dropped a nugget that I hope people caught. Even though she has people who will brief her, the best briefing you can ever get is a briefing that you've already briefed yourself on, right? And she just dropped that nugget. That's remarkable. You being a former mayor, the job, as you say, was very tough. It was exhausting. I remember after Macaroni and Cheesegate, how many of y'all remember when Keisha Lance Bottoms, just right around the holidays, whoo-wee, that was some serious macaroni and cheese. Do you remember this?
I was actually not in town.
When it happened, when it went
When
down.
it happened.
It was a huge scandal.
But several people text me and asked me if I could cook.
Yeah.
And I gave them my mother's answer. My mother's answer was, I could if I wanted to, but I don't really want to.
All right, so you don't really want to. Okay, so let me tell you what happened. This was so interesting. So obviously it was the holidays, and it was Thanksgiving, right? And she posted, no, it wasn't Thanksgiving, it was Christmas. It was Christmas. And so Mayor Bottoms is posting, just like a lot of y'all do, all of the dishes she's making on social media. Well, she came across the macaroni and cheese dish. It was on CNN, Fox News, the AJC picked it up, and we're looking at this like, I can't believe this is newsworthy. So I decided to actually call Mayor Bottoms. It was either Christmas night or early the day after Christmas. And I said, listen, we got to talk about this mac and cheese scandal. I said, come on the show, we'll make fun of it, okay? So she came on the show on the day after Christmas and talked about it and said, hey, I didn't mix the macaroni and cheese properly, but trust, I know how to cook. And we kind of laughed at it. At the end of that interview, I asked her a serious question, and I said, you've been mayor for a year. How has it been? And she gave an answer that I did not expect. She said, Rashad, it has been hard. And the way she said it was so sobering. It brought you into her space just for that moment to say, no, this is real. This is tough. You can identify with that.
Well, I can't even imagine. Remember now, when she's mayor, she has young children.
Yeah.
She's married.
She's a foster mom.
Well, she's got children.
She got children, yeah.
Children is children
Yeah.
if they're in the house. They're yours,
They're
right?
yours.
So, and then she's trying to cook too.
Did you say trying to cook?
Well, I mean,
Was that slick shade?
No,
okay, all right.
Not really. I mean, you're doing laundry, you're
Right.
doing cooking, you're doing homework, you're doing hair.
Yeah,
you're
it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
it's a lot. And you know, does it really matter
Yeah.
if they ate it?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
She did say it was gone. She said
Yeah,
everybody
that's
ate
what
the
I'm
macaroni and
saying.
cheese.
Now, on the other hand, it was, in some ways, it was an opportunity for her to talk about, you know, other aspects of her life, which is a
Right.
relief.
Yeah, and it
Because-
humanized her, I think.
And
actually.
yeah, I mean, it's a relief to give people to give you a chance to talk about something other than the pothole down
Sure.
the street.
Right.
Or whatever is on their mind. So, I mean, just to talk to you as a human, an everyday person, and say, well, how do you make your macaroni and cheese?
Yeah.
If people, when I worked for Andrew Young, and this would have been in the 80s, he didn't believe I could cook. So he invited himself and some of the staff to the house so that I could cook a meal.
To make you cook.
Yes!
To prove yourself.
To prove myself.
Wow.
And I think they ate it.
Right.
But I don't think anybody bragged about it.
Why didn't they brag about
Because
it?
it probably was okay. You know, cooking is something I do because I have to eat.
Understand.
Other people love it.
Yeah.
You know, I love gardening. And some people say I just go to the store and buy my tomatoes. I'd rather grow my own. So, I mean, we all make these choices.
Yeah.
So I'm not your ideal. I would never brag about, I can't post anything that I'm cooking online.
You could post somebody else's dish.
I post my garden and people drool.
Nice. Is it that bad?
Is that good?
You know that's going to be on the AJC now.
They know it.
They
People
already
know
know.
it. I'm on Instagram. My garden is all over Instagram.
All right,
now.
we got to check out that IG account now.
I got
Sometimes people criticize me because I say things like, you can't just vote for black folks because they are black. Okay, I've said that many times on my program. Some people criticize me for that. I mean every word of it. You got criticized because after that interview, you actually came out and endorsed the opponent of Keisha Lance Bottoms, who was Mary Norwood. You came out. It wasn't just you. It was almost like a dream team. It was a lot of you guys who came out and endorsed Mary Norwood. Let's bring that clip and we'll talk about that moment in leadership for you.
In the December 5th runoff for Atlanta's mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms and Mary Norwood will face off for the city's top job. And Mary picked up 2 big endorsements today. Fox 5's Morse Diggs has followed all of these developments in the race, and Norwood now has the backing of a former Atlanta mayor.
Well, yes, there are endorsements and there are big-time headline-grabbing endorsements, and this was that kind of morning. Shirley Franklin, the 2-term former mayor, has stayed mostly out of the limelight. Now she has jumped right in the middle of this contentious mayor's race. So that means Mary Norwood now has the most significant package of political endorsements in this runoff. She was there this morning with Caesar Mitchell. You'll recall that he endorsed last week. Also joining the Norwood team is Peter Amon, who ran unsuccessfully for mayor. But no doubt the headliner is Franklin, the respected former mayor. She explained why she felt it was necessary for her to come off the sidelines.
Young woman approached me at a Starbucks in my neighborhood about 5 months ago. I've not told anyone this story. And she said to me, I have a problem. And she was talking about her favorite candidate. And I said, what's your problem? She said, my problem is my favorite candidate won't come to my neighborhood, but every time I call Mary Norwood, she's there. She returns the call. She sends someone. That's the kind of consistent, regular support neighborhoods and communities have had.
I am so honored to have the endorsement of our former mayor. She came to City Hall and she fixed it. She fixed the finances. She funded the Beltline. She fixed water sewer. She fixed ethics and trust and transparency back into city government. And as she said, the FBI was there when she got there, but they weren't there when she left. And I pledge to you, the FBI will be there when I get there, but they won't be there when I leave either.
Wow.
Now, I asked Ms. Frank.
Keisha Lance Bottoms, one, I wish her well and would do anything I could to help her.
Have you spoken to her since she became mayor?
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure. We don't talk a lot, but I text her when you know me. I see something on your show or hear something on your show, or I'm busy texting. Did you know so-and-so and so-and-so?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people don't know the history.
That's right.
I'm not suggesting what you should do about it, but I can help you understand the foundation or the background.
See, that's dynamic. A person in your capacity as a former mayor, someone with insight, you did endorse her opponent to become mayor, but you are also genuine enough to say, I'm willing to guide you still if requested. I'm willing to give you advice, information.
I'm willing to stay out of the way. I mean, you got a choice. I mean, and I've had that conversation with her. If you need me, fine. If you don't want me involved, that's fine too. I mean, I keep forgetting how old I am, but I'm 1945, so you know it's kind of old, right? I'm not looking for a platform. I've had a platform. I'm not looking for a platform. And there's a story behind this that I'm not quite ready to tell yet.
Why?
Well, no.
Come on now, Mayor. It's
There's
just
a story
us.
behind this. You know, not everyone I am a person who's prepared to take the negative fallout for doing something that's unpopular. But I grew up in the 40s and the 50s. I told you where I came from, you know, in general terms. And it's the same as running for mayor. When I really didn't want to run, but Andy and Maynard and a handful of women said, you have to do this. You are prepared to be mayor. I was happy in the background. I looked in the mirror one day and I said, you know what? I'm busy telling young women that they can be anything they want to be, and that is not the truth. And I'm hanging back when I have an opportunity to open the door. I mean, I'm really a hypocrite. So I go out to high schools and tell young women, you can do this, 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 and this. When I know it isn't true. There were 3 women who ran before I ran, and they were all qualified, and all would have been wonderful mayors. So I am comfortable standing out on the edge. And let me put it this way. I'm a grandmother. So what do grandmothers do? They get out in front so the bullets hit them and don't hit everybody else.
I want to know this backstory.
Well, that's it.
That's all I'm getting.
That's it.
Okay.
You can put all the pieces together. Sometimes you go out front.
Yeah.
You take all the bullets.
Yeah. It's part of leadership sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So people, it slowed it down a little bit in terms of the animosity for me to be out front.
Yeah.
It just slowed it down a little bit.
Let's talk about that, because it was tough. I'm sitting back. I'm friends with Caesar Mitchell, okay, president of city council. He's getting beat up pretty bad by Mayor Reed at this time through media and social media. He's such he's just a great guy. Caesar Mitchell is a great guy, right? When you jumped in, it stopped a lot of that.
What did I just say?
Okay, so now we know the story, right?
Sometimes you just have to put a shield up and say, okay, you want to talk about big stuff?
Yeah.
Here I am. Let's have the conversation. You notice there was no comeback.
He never came at you like that.
Oh, no.
Ever.
Because he didn't want to hear what else I had to say.
See, but we do, though. We want to know.
But I mean, now remember, go back to Philadelphia, okay? I'm traveling the city by myself.
Yeah.
I got no cousins,
Yeah.
no brothers, no nephews, no uncles. I got nobody but me going from one side of the city to the other side of the city every single day. Took me an hour and a half to get to school each way on public transportation. I'm playing in the schoolyard. I'm playing on the street. You develop a certain toughness And you know when to take a stand and when not. You know which fights to get in and which ones to avoid. Which streets in Philadelphia, you know which streets to avoid. You can't walk down every street after dark. So some of that is just who I am. And
You know how to navigate.
yes, and I'm willing to walk down some streets just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. When you made the choice to endorse Mary Norwood, I remember getting the news before you hit the press conference. And immediately my sense was, she's doing what she believes in. I never got the sense that you were doing something to politically maneuver yourself. I felt it was simply what you believed in doing, and you did it.
Now, mind you, I endorsed Kasim Reed over Mary Norwood. But I had worked with Mary Norwood for 8 years as mayor, so I knew her. And when we got to the runoff, I thought that she brought some qualities that would be beneficial to the city. That's not a negative on Mayor Bottoms, because she obviously brings some that are important, but I didn't have the same relationship. You know, some people say, I didn't endorse in the primary with Evans and Abrams. I talked to both of them during the primary period. Whoever called me, they had a question or needed some advice, I gave it to them. But I knew who I was going to vote for. And I told Evans that I did not see a path for her to beat Stacey Abrams. Because Abrams is just a formidable candidate. She just is. You put her up against anyone in the country.
She'll be competitive.
And she'll be competitive.
Yeah.
And so you make these decisions.
Yeah. Any regrets?
I have regrets. I got tons of them.
Name one.
I didn't do more to address the issues of poverty. I think I did some things I didn't do nearly enough. It troubles me. 20 to 25% of the population of Atlanta since the 1980s has lived below the poverty line in terms of income, and another 10 to 15% are just above that. I don't think I did nearly enough, and I regret that. It troubles me. I think about it, and I just think Atlanta has swept the issues of poverty, I'm including myself in this, under the rug. People are struggling, they're trying, but to expect someone, I mean, Georgia, I just gave a speech about this. I mean, Georgia, the minimum wage is $7.25.
Yeah.
It's hard to support yourself on $7.25 an hour, and almost impossible to support a family. And then you say to folks, well, you don't have, I mean, what they don't have is money. Yeah. They've got aspirations, they've got work ethic, they have dreams for their children. It's very depressing. And I don't think we do enough on wages, on wage stagnation, on affordability, and not necessarily the general sense of affordability at the low end.
We're talking about a defined term of affordability.
Yes, at the low end, we act as if I was blessed. I was born into a family that had an education. Even though my father hit rough spots, there was a family to come around. I never wanted for anything that was basic, and I got a lot of other things too. That's God's grace. That's not something I did.
Right.
And not everyone has had that opportunity. I mean, you talk Ethel Mae Matthews, Eva Davis, Louise Watley, the names could go on. Any of those women could have been mayor if they had had my opportunity.
Right. Legacy, greatest legacy as mayor.
Ooh, I have a saying that if I got to tell you my legacy, I don't have one.
I have an, so this is what's interesting. I have an article coming out in Rolling Out magazine tomorrow. I highlight your legacy in that article. I send it to you of what I think.
Well, thank you.
your legacy is.
I mean, I'm proud of a lot of things that the city has done, and I continue to work to do my part in that regard. But you know, if you're talking to mayors, former mayors, we would say, I mean, most people think I was honest.
Yeah.
I was honest. I had people say to me, an elderly gentleman actually, and that's something for me to call him elderly. Elderly gentleman said to me the other day, well, don't all elected officials kind of take a little bit on the side? I said, no way.
Wow.
But you know, I mean, it's in people's minds.
He came to you and said that basically everybody takes something.
Yeah, he said everybody does that. I said, no.
Yeah.
I said, I didn't do that. He said, well, you're different. And I said, no, I'm not. Our standard can't be this low standard. I mean, there's this, when I was growing up, it was the conversation often was, well, you know, white leaders have done it, so why are we getting caught? Well, I'm not arguing that might not be true, but I don't judge myself against the least.
Right.
The lowest standard, I judge myself against the highest standard.
You bring up a remarkable point. I can't tell you, now how many of y'all have heard somebody call my show and say that before? Okay, that white folks do it, why they locking up black folks for doing it? And I remember one caller hit me with that for the first time, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago, right? And we were talking about serious corruption. And the person I was highlighting happened to be an African-American male doing some ridiculous stuff, right? And I remember telling this brother on the phone, I said, my man, you can't play their game. So if we're saying their game is corrupt, why would you be okay playing their corrupt game? We don't play their game because our standard should be higher, just as decent, everyday people. You never played that game. You never had any hint of corruption with your administration. And as I said, people still call you the last good mayor.
Well, I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I mean, I think Mayor Bottoms is working hard. She's working hard at it, and I mean, she's just in her first year or so. I mean, it's not. I don't want to be.
And I know you don't want the title, but people say that about you.
People said I was going to be the last black mayor. They said I was going to be the only female mayor. We don't know all that. Yeah. You know, I don't think I don't feel a competition.
Right.
With other, I knew two great mayors. I worked for them.
What happens when people come up to you? Because I'm sure people say that to you at a grocery store or when you're out shopping. They come say, "Yeah, I wish you were still mayor," right? You get that.
I get a little of that. Most people want an answer to something.
We got a new governor, Governor
Kemp?
Brian Kemp, who, by the way, I know very well. We've actually debated on CBS 46 a few times. I mopped the floor with the guy. Yeah, I did. I actually did. So he gets elected. Obviously, he's in, and you gave a speech, and you talked about discrimination. Do you remember this speech?
Oh yes, I wrote it.
You wrote the speech, and to my understanding, he was in the room. Was he in the room?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was sitting next to him.
So here's how, and I was trying to find video. I couldn't find video of this thing, okay? I called a few people and got some copy notes about it. But basically, you called him out, and he was right in front of you, in front of the audience. What? Okay. That's bold leadership, right? What made you feel that it was the opportunity to say what you said? And I think everything you said was completely appropriate and proper. But it was obvious to many, according to my conversations with them, that you were landing these points to make sure he was put on notice. Was that accurate?
Dr. King's birthday is a unique opportunity to speak truth to power. If you are, in my view, if you celebrate Dr. King's legacy, he was not afraid to speak up. He spoke up to sitting presidents, to law enforcement, to black and white preachers. I mean, the letter from the Birmingham jail, he's holding clergy accountable. So if in fact you are invited to speak on that particular day or in his honor, I believe you have to speak in the terms that are consistent with his life and legacy. So this particular speech, I had been invited several times by Senator Jones, Emanuel Jones, to speak, and I declined. And in 2017, he called in the fall and said, we'd like you to speak in January 2018. And because it was in the Capitol, and that's not normally the place that I have my say, I declined. And I think I had a conflict. He, in that conversation, asked me to speak in 2019. And I couldn't say I had a conflict. So now I've accepted. So I've told you the context of what is important to me then. And for many years, going back to 2002, those speeches on those days tend to be provocative and stronger than any other speech that I give. And I wrote them all over the years. So I'm not particularly conciliatory on that day. I'm an easy person to get along with. I like to work in groups, and I can work with all kinds of people. And the governor and the lieutenant governor, I didn't know the lieutenant governor, were on either side of me. So when I met the lieutenant governor, I told him, I said, listen, this is a special day to me. I'm going to say exactly what is on my mind, because that is the only way I can speak on Dr. King's birthday. And when the governor came, I told him the same thing.
What was his response?
He said, I understand.
He's a nice guy.
I don't know him.
Yeah.
But I mean, I hope he is.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
I mean, I hope he is. And he knows me from work that I did at the General Assembly, because he was in the General Assembly at the time. So Bernice gave a very strong speech too, Bernice King. And she talked about national issues.
Right.
I talked about state issues.
You talked about legislation, bigotry
Wages.
bills.
Exactly. I talked about we haven't figured out whether we want to round up immigrants like vigilantes. I mean, I use that word.
Did you look at his response while giving that speech?
I wasn't worried about his response.
It's a good answer.
I mean, I was giving my speech. He had his time to speak.
Right.
That was my time to speak.
Is there a freedom with post-politics?
Oh, I felt free in politics.
No matter what.
Yeah, I felt free.
And I sense that.
Yeah, I felt free in politics.
Yeah.
On that particular day,
You always, whatever you want.
whatever I had to say,
Yeah.
or in honoring people.
Sure.
When I was speaking about, I spoke at Coretta Scott King's funeral, and there were 4 presidents there. And I talked about, I mean, one of the things that I said, that one of my friends who read the speech, he said, you're not really going to talk about bombing Baghdad, are you? With President Bush sitting on the stage. I said, I absolutely am. Coretta Scott King would. There's no, I don't add anything if I just say what everybody else is thinking.
Right.
And I don't know what they're thinking. I know what I'm thinking.
Right. And you're thinking about it from the perspective of who you're honoring.
Yes, and what it is about them that inspires me. What inspires me about Dr. King, Coretta Scott King, and other leaders is they stand up for what they believe.
Yeah.
So
All right.
I am wasting time
If you don't do it.
if I don't do that. I can stay home and watch a movie on Netflix.
We're coming to the end. We got to be respectful of time. A couple of gut check questions, just really quick.
Sure.
Okay. Favorite movie?
Oh, I got so many, but my favorite all-time movie is Singing in the Rain. Nobody here has seen it, right? Fantasia.
We got 1, 2. All right. Favorite color?
Oh, I don't even know. Green.
Okay. Favorite leader?
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. Okay. We're going to open the floor up for Q&A. We got to be very quick, so make sure your questions are precise. She has another event, so we have to be up out of here quickly. And I'm going to just recognize you from the floor. Yes, quickly. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, like no, when you became mayor, a lot of people were so excited that you became mayor, but the city workers, when you got there, you laid off a lot of employees who really voted for you, and it was so sad and hurt that you laid them off. Just through your personal experience, working with Mayor Jackson and Andrew Young, and you said you were a very good observer. Did you think it was the right thing to do, or did you think they were proud of you once you did?
I don't think there's any question. Well, a couple things. Number one, no. I think people were very concerned. I came into office and there was a 20% deficit. The city didn't have any money to pay for expenses. And I proposed raising taxes, 42%, and I had to cut some. But what we did with with anyone who wanted, and it was hundreds of them, we actually worked with them, and many of them got placed in other jobs in the city. And some actually went back to school and got jobs in the private sector. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, it was clearly the hardest thing I've ever done. But one of the reasons I had to do it is because nobody else wanted to. Nobody else wanted to admit that we were $100 million or $80 million short. Everybody was telling me, oh, you can figure it out. Well, I can't figure out $80 million.
Tough decision. Okay, yes.
Hey, Mayor Franklin, I have a question. What I remember about when you were mayor, and this is, I know you're gonna be like, really? You had a press conference, and they kept coming at you. And all I remember is you said something about the Philly was coming out. Did that mean you could throw hands, and can you still throw hands today?
No, what happened, I wasn't at a press conference, I was at a kind of a public event. And there was a woman, it was this room about this size, but there were columns. And while I was trying to speak, there was a woman standing behind a column shouting. And
Listen, I already know you.
and so I said, you've forgotten who I am. I said, I'm from Philadelphia. Now, everybody in Atlanta hated it. People in Philadelphia loved it.
Yeah, right.
So I walked off the stage to the column where she was standing, and she shut up.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, my point was, I don't have a problem with the debate, but she was hiding herself. You know folk like that? Mm-hmm. They want to do it in the dark. Mm-hmm. You know, and they don't want to, I mean, I had people do it on social media. When I would post something, they would say something back, or I had people on social media say, we wish you wouldn't answer. I'm like, I don't get to answer when you're talking about me? Mm-hmm. I said, that don't work.
Yeah. All right, next question, quickly. Yes, ma'am, here.
I wonder what you think about, are you surprised that Stacey Abrams is going to give the rebuttal or whatever you call it from the
State of the Union.
I think it's fabulous.
Yeah.
I think she will do a great job. I think she'll do a great job. She is keen on the issues. She's articulate. She's genuine. She's had a lot of life experiences that are like a lot of the rest of us. She's had some great life experiences, but she's had some basic, hard times in her life. And I think she'll come across, I don't think it'll be great for Georgia, great for women, great for African Americans, great for African American women. I think it's really wonderful.
Yeah, and great for Democrats, and obviously she can do this way better than Chuck or Nancy.
I think she can do it better than most.
Yeah.
And she's been out on the campaign trail.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, on this side, who we got? Yes.
Yes, to the comment about Norwood and you endorsing, I remember there was a lot of talk at my job about that, but I understood that my mother used to tell me that when you have a business or a leader, you want the cream of the crop, you don't care what color the cream is. She's a lot like you. I had the pleasure of meeting you in a public area, and you were always with the people. You were always the kind of person who we could approach, and that's the kind of leader we like. So I just applaud you, and I agree. You were the last great mayor.
Well, thank you.
And this side. Yes, sir. Got to get a brother in here. Go ahead, man. Yeah.
Campaigning
Well, I don't know. He changed his mind. He decided that he didn't. He started making what I considered crazy, derogatory statements, both in public and private, about me. And for about a year, I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. And then when people would say that, I'd say, well, this is what I think about that. That got back to him. And he asked for a meeting. So the two of us met. And, remember now, I'm 74, I was 65 then, right? I told him that. I said, why would you think that I wouldn't defend myself when you are saying these things? I didn't do it on television or radio or anything, just in conversation. And he said something that I had heard many times in my life. He said, well, what did I do? And I said, Kasim, I'm an African-American woman. I've been listening to black men since I was 12, 13 years old. You really saying that to me? I said, really? You know what you've been doing? I don't have to tell you. I guess he didn't like that.
How did that meeting end?
I was ready to go then. But I don't wish him any ill. It's just that I wasn't going to be with that program. That wasn't going to be my program. I don't wish him any ill. Didn't wish him any ill then. Don't wish him any ill now. I hope he's fine. I hope his family is fine, and I hope he does well. I mean, I don't have any animosity about it. But who I associate with is a choice I get to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
I am free to make my own associations. And I don't do well with people who say one thing and do another.
Come on now. Come on. Advice to aspiring leaders, Mayor Franklin, and we'll get you out of here. Advice to aspiring leaders.
Humility. He didn't show that a few minutes ago. Humility. Humility is as much a part of leadership as vision, hard work, anything else, talents. Humility. Because with humility, you are acknowledging that other people have talents, need to have opportunities, and are part of the world, and the world that was created by God.
Amen.
Humility. There are lots of other attributes of leadership, but remembering who you are, where you came from, who lifted you up, and acknowledging that you would be nothing or very little without that.
Come on. And on that note, Mayor Franklin.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thank you.